Tonight. Hello and welcome to tonight's lecture arranged by Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm your host, Dr. Ali Ahmed Shuaib. Tonight we have the fourth lecture of our series, 7-part series, Applied Multiplexity, Ibn Khaldun as an example. The aim of the series is to understand Ibn Khaldun's multiplex approach to social sciences. So that was a series. The title of tonight's lecture is Ibn Khaldun on Methods, Multiplex Methodology. So our lecturer and our dear Professor Recep Şentürk, again, I introduce him to you all, but you are familiar with him because he has delivered more than one series for us on some valuable thinking of how to approach society and how to look at society in a very different and a refreshing way. Professor Recep Şentürk is the Dean of the College of the Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. He was the former founding president of Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. He holds a PhD from Columbia University's Department of Sociology and specializes in civilizational studies, sociology and Islamic studies with a focus on social networks, human rights and modernization in the Muslim world. He served as a researcher at the Center for Islamic Studies in Istanbul and is the founding director of the Alliance of Civilizations Institute. And he's also the head of the International Ibn Khaldun Society and has a seat on the editorial boards of multiple academic journals. He has published widely, and amongst his books in English include The Narrative Social Structure, Hadith Transmission Network, 1610 to 1505, and in Turkish, Open Civilization Towards a Multi-Civilizational Society and World, Ibn Khaldun, Contemporary Readings, Malcolm X, Struggle for Human Rights and Social Memory, and Hadith Transmission Network. And so Professor Şentürk's work has also been translated to Arabic and Japanese and Spanish. So that is a brief introduction to our speaker tonight. The lecture will take, it's in a format of a lecture, and then afterwards a Q&A and comment and answer section. The lecture will take around 30 to 45 minutes approximately, and it will be followed by another 30 to 45 minutes, depending on your appetite for question and answer session. Few house rules, please, to all those who are participating today. I would be grateful if you can keep your microphone and your mobile switched off or muted. I'll definitely encourage you to take notes during, because some of this information that you will gain will be quite mind-boggling and it requires noting. So please take some notes, formulate your questions and your comments for later on in the Q&A section. And we definitely encourage you to ask any questions relating to the topic, basically, and we'd like to restrict it to that topic. So now, without further ado, I would request Professor Şentürk to deliver his lecture on today's topic, which is Ibn Khaldun on Methods, Multiplex Methodology. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Could you please allow me to share my screen?
Bear with me. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, Professor. Let me just have a quick look. How do I? Apologies, because I normally. Sophia, are you able to do that for us? Give me 1 second.
One participant can share at a time, not advanced sharing. Let's have it. Yeah, I'm just trying.
Okay, multiple participants. I will set that in. Okay.
I think.
Okay, tamam. Now I can.
You can share now. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Selamun aleyküm. Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillahi Rabbil alemin. Ve salatu ve selamu ala Resulina ve Habibina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahbihi ecma'in. I wish you all, a happy and blessed Ramadan. This is my early wishes Inshallah ta'ala, this will be my last lecture before Ramadan, and inshallah we will resume after Ramadan. So this is planned to be 7 lectures. The rest of the lectures will be after Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. So this series, as it's already mentioned, it's about applied multiplexity, because I have talked about multiplexity in my previous lectures, and I wanted to show concretely how multiplexity has been implemented by Muslim scholars, and I chose Ibn Khaldun as an example. And in this lecture, I will talk about multiplex methodology and how Ibn Khaldun used multiplex methodology. It doesn't mean Ibn Khaldun is the only scholar, who implements multiplex methodology. All Muslim scholars, all of them, implement multiplex methodology, and they call it maratibul usul. Maratibul usul, and I use Ibn Khaldun only as an example. Please keep this in mind. So today, when you look at the works on Ibn Khaldun, some of them call it empiricist. Some of them call him rationalist. Some of them call him like a Sufi. All of them are true, but all of them are wrong. They are true in the sense that Ibn Khaldun uses empirical methods, but he's not empiricist, because he does not say empirical methods are the only methods to produce scientific knowledge. He just uses them in a particular domain. He also uses rational methods, but he's not a rationalist. Because when you say someone is rationalist, you mean that he relies only on reason to produce knowledge. He rejects other things. And at the same time, Ibn Khaldun relies on wahi, like the Quran and Hadith, as a source of knowledge. And he also accepts kashf, ru'ya, spiritual unveiling as sources of knowledge. So this is what I call multiplex methodology. So being simply empiricist, this is uniplex methodology, or rationalist, another example of uniplex. Reductionist. When I say uniplex, I mean reductionist, trying to reduce everything to a single method, or this like spiritualist, focusing on the spiritual epistemology. They are also reductionist, but Ibn Khaldun, as a Muslim scholar, combines all of them, and this is what I will explain in this lecture, what I mean by multiplex methodology and how Ibn Khaldun used this multiplex methodology in his scholarly works. So Ibn Khaldun, in the beginning of Muqaddimah, talks about a new methodological standard about narratives, about reported knowledge, because he tries to combine experience, reason, and nature of Umran. Before and during Ibn Khaldun's times, historians were using the method of Jarh wa Ta'dil. And Jarh wa Ta'dil is a method in particular used by scholars of Hadith to critically analyze whether the Hadith is reliable or not, to test the authenticity or reliability of the Hadith by examining the narrators and the chain of narration and the content of the Hadith. So whether those people who narrated the Hadith are reliable or not. So this is the method Jarh and Ta'dil. So this was used to verify and critically analyze historical reports, narratives about the past events, and in particular about the Sirah and the Hadith of Rasulullah alayhi wasallam. Ibn Khaldun criticized the use of traditional method of transmitted sciences, al-ulum al-naqliya, in particular the Hadith, in the discipline of history. He said that this method, Jarh wa Ta'dil, can be used in some of the religious sciences, such as Hadith or Tafsir, or Fiqh, but not in the discipline of history. Why? This is how he explained why this Jarh and Ta'dil alone is not sufficient in the discipline of history. He said that statements conveyed to us through religious disciplines, they are performative, they are insha'i, they construct a new reality by commanding people to do things or forbidding certain things. So basically they are performative statements about do's and don'ts. However, the statements that are subject of historiography, they are constative, they are informative, they are ikhbari. So there are two types of knowledge, two types of statements, insha'i and ikhbari. Performative, to create a new reality, or constructive, to construct a new reality, or informative, just give information about what happened in the past. So he classifies the reports this way: insha'i reports, ikhbari reports, constructive reports, or informative reports. So insha'i statements, that's constructive reports, performative statements, cannot be true or false, because they give order, like salat is fard, zakat is fard, alcohol is haram. You cannot say this is true or false, because this is a command from Allah Ta'ala or Rasulullah alayhi wasallam. Therefore, we cannot test whether they are conforming to reality or not, because they are trying to change reality. Their goal is to rebuild the reality. But ikhbari statements, the informative statements, which give us information about what happened in the past, okay, they can be true or false. So this is a very important distinction Ibn Khaldun is making. Therefore, he says, while writing history, one should not only look at the credentials of the transmitters by using the method of Jarh and Ta'dil borrowed from the discipline of Hadith, but also one should examine whether the news reported to us by the transmitter, first, is appropriate to the experience, second, is reasonable, third, is suitable to the nature of the Umran. So he came up with some new critical methods to analyze the reports, the ikhbari reports, informative reports about the past events. Is our experience conform them? Are they reasonable or not? Or are they suitable with the nature of society, with the nature of civilization? So he proposed these new methods. This is a very important methodological contribution by him to the discipline of history in particular, but also in general to social studies, because these disciplines, they rely on reported knowledge. So one of the things he proposed is to critically analyze the reported knowledge, whether or not it's compatible with the nature of Imran. But what's nature of Imran? Nature of civilization, nature of society. What is it? For Ibn Khaldun, in order to avoid mistakes in reporting and to verify reported knowledge, one should know the nature of Imran. And he wrote, if he trusts historical information in its plain transmitted form and has no clear knowledge of the principles resulting from custom, the fundamental facts of politics, the nature of civilization, or the conditions governing human social organization, and if furthermore he means the social scientist or the historian, does not evaluate remote and ancient material through comparison with near or contemporary material. This is the method of qiyas. You know, if something reported about the past, whether the same thing is possible today. You know, so just make a qiyas comparison. If he doesn't do this, he often cannot avoid stumbling and slipping and deviating from the high road of truth. Okay, so he's proposing, in order to avoid any mistakes when you are writing history, and history has two levels. So Ibn Khaldun claims that history, society, has external surface level and then internal level. So Zahir of history, Zahir of society, and then the batin, the internal level of history. So the external or the surface of history is about news and reporting, reporting of what happened in the past. But the internal level of history, the batin, so the Zahir and batin, you see this multiplexity here. You know, I mean, similar to the multiplexity between Insha'i and Ikhbari reports, or informative and constructive knowledge and statements. Here again, he's saying that history has two levels. This is again multiplexity, the external appearance, explicit level, and then the implicit, internal, hidden, latent level of history. So the level, the internal or the latent level of history includes nazar, tahqiq, ta'lil, and ilm. So these are the four methods used by the discipline of history, and they make up the internal level of history. Externally, history is just reporting knowledge, ikhbar, reporting the events. But internally, history, you know, requires nazar, tahqiq, ta'lil, and ilm. So what's nazar? Nazar means theorization, conceptualization, analyzing particular events to be able to reach general patterns, from juz'iyat to kulliyat, from ma'loom to majhul. This is the meaning of nazar. And then tahqiq. Tahqiq means verification, investigation, critical analysis, you know, uncovering the truth of an issue. That's the tahqiq method he's proposing. And then the ta'lil. Ta'lil means, ta'lil comes from illa, and illa in Arabic means cause. So ta'lil means, you know, exploring the causality, the relationship of cause and effect within the framework of very refined principles. And he also says ilm is another method of history. This is about like what happened. So ilm is about what happened. Ta'lil is about why it happened. And tahqiq is critically verify the data. And then the nazar move from particular events to the general general patterns. For instance, let's say Roman Empire collapsed, German Empire collapsed, British Empire collapsed, Ottoman Empire collapsed. Like studying these things, can we come up with a theory of why empires collapse? This is nazar. This is a theorization. It's moving from particulars to a general pattern. So Ibn Khaldun argues that these are the methods which make up the internal level of the discipline of history. So in Arabic, he wrote that. Let me read first the English and then the Arabic. So he says that history is a discipline widely cultivated among nations and races. So it's a universal discipline. All civilizations, all nations, all societies have history. It's eagerly sought after. The man in the street, the ordinary people aspire to know it. Kings and leaders vie for it. Both the learned and the ignorant are able to understand it. For on the surface, history is no more than information about political events, dynasties, and occurrences of the remote past, elegantly presented and spiced with proverbs. It serves to entertain large crowded gatherings and brings to us an understanding of human affairs. It shows how changing conditions affected human affairs, how certain dynasties came to occupy an ever wider space in the world, and how they settled to earth until they heard the call and their time was up. The inner meaning of history, on the other hand, involves speculation and an attempt to get at the truth, subtle explanation of the causes and origins of existing things, and deep knowledge of the how and why of events. History, therefore, is firmly rooted in philosophy. It deserves to be accounted a branch of philosophy, hikmah. So in Arabic, he says that إذ هو في ظاهره لا يزيد على أخبار or إخبار عن الأيام والأول وفي باطنه. I am skipping, just to draw your attention to what's important for us. وفي باطنه, history in its internal level, نظر وتحقيق وتعليل للكائنات ومبادئها دقيق وعلم بكيفيات الوقائع وأسبابها عميق. So you see, these are the methods that we have already discussed. So internally, like history relies on the method of nazar, method of tahqiq, method of ta'lil, and also علم بكيفيات الوقائع. فهو لهذا أصيل في الحكمة عريق وجدير من أن يعد في علومها وخليق. So al-hikmah means rational and empirical disciplines like philosophy, physics, chemistry, medical science. They were all under the title of al-hikmah at that time. So that's why he's saying history is part of those sciences which uses empirical and rational methods. Because this issue is debatable even today, whether history is a science or not. Some say history is not science, it's part of the humanities, because it does not deal with the causal explanation of the events. But some argues the opposite. They say history is a science because history tries to expose causal relations among the events. So at the time of Ibn Khaldun, this issue was also debated. So some people said history is just narratives, ikhbar or akhbar about the past events. But he's saying, no, it is not just that. This is just the surface. Don't be deceived by what you see at the surface. Internally, like real history, requires theoretical thinking, requires causal explanation, requires verification of the data, requires knowing the processes, how things happen, and thus is part of the rational and empirical sciences. This is the argument of Ibn Khaldun. Let's discuss these concepts a bit more, which Ibn Khaldun argues that these are the methods of the discipline of history. But when he says history, he means all social sciences in general. He does not mean what we mean today when we say history. He means all social sciences in general, because he uses history, at-tarikh, as kind of synonyms for ilm umran. There is a close relationship between tarikh and ilm umran in his understanding. So that's why when he talks about history, we should better to understand it as social sciences today. So nazar means theorizing through conceptualization and analysis with the purpose of discovering general patterns in history and society. It requires moving from particular events to a general law by discovering repeated patterns. I gave you the example of the collapse of the empires. So you study first like different empires which collapsed. Then from this particular knowledge, you try to abstract some general pattern. So this is nazar, this is theorization. And ta'lil refers to causal explanation. So history is a discipline, which exposes the causes of the events. It's not just like reporting. So it provides an answer to why a particular event or pattern takes place in history and society. Discovering the cause of events may help to reproduce or prevent their recurrence. And tahqiq refers to teaching the truth of the subject under study through verification of reports and the inherited knowledge about it. The opposite of tahqiq is taqlid, which means imitation of former authorities and accepting their reports without verification. He's very much against this because scientific academic work cannot rely on accepting knowledge simply based on the authority of other individuals. So ilm in the context refers to search for knowledge of universals. Knowledge about particular events is not called ilm. Ilm is the outcome of theorization by moving from data about particulars to universal laws. According to Ibn Khaldun, when these four methods are applied, they elevate history from the level of mere narration, mere storytelling, to the level of a proper science. So Ibn Khaldun not only criticized historians who relied simply on reported knowledge and accepted the reported knowledge based on the authority of the people who reported them. So he critically analyzed this, but at the same time, he was critical of the philosophers who are rationalists. So on the one hand, like he was criticizing people who relied on naql, reported knowledge, but on the other hand, he was criticizing the rationalist philosophers. Why? Because they relied on reason alone. They did not pay attention to the limits of reason. They rejected naql, as a legitimate and respectable source of knowledge. So The knowledge of the physical world is acquired through senses and processed through reason. And this is hikmah, like natural sciences, and Ibn Khaldun accepts this. When it comes to understanding metaphysical world, philosophers such as Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd used pure reasoning. So they not only used reason in studying nature and the physical world we live in, but they extended usage of reason to the metaphysical world. By using Nazar Aqli, the pure rationality in the metaphysical domain, they come up with a cosmology based on the theory of Sudur. Sudur, the theory of Sudur means emanation, not creation. So that's the difference between Ahlul Sunnah Ilm al-Kalam and the philosophers who were influenced from the Greek philosophy. So Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd, they believe in Sudur, which is emanation. They argue that the world emanated from God. He did not create it. It emanated from them. That's the theory of Sudur. But the Ahl Sunnah, like the Maturidi Ash'ari, they say that Allah Ta'ala created khalq. Yeah, how does Ibn Khaldun criticize this? He says that that the philosophers, al-hukama al-ilahiyun, make conjectures, speculations about details concerning the essences of the spiritual world and their order. So, they make conjectures, speculations about the metaphysical world, the spiritual world. They call these essences intellects. However, none of it is certain, because the conditions of logical argumentation as established in logic do not apply to it. One of these conditions is that the propositions of an argument must be primary, awwali, and essential, zati, but the spiritual essences are of an unknown essentiality. Thus, logical argumentation cannot be applied to them. Our only means of perceiving something of the details of these worlds, the metaphysical world, are what we may obtain from methods of religious law, Sharia, through wahi, as explained and established by religious faith. Of the three worlds, the one we can perceive best is the world of human beings. If after all toil and trouble, we find only conjectures, the conjectures that we had at the beginning may as well suffice us. So this is how Ibn Khaldun criticized philosophers, because what they do is, I call it a methodological transgression. Like rational empirical methods, they should be used in the physical world, to study physical world. When you extend them to the metaphysical world, you are committing epistemological transgression or methodological transpassing. So this is how he criticized, and this is very similar to Imam Ghazali's critique of the philosophers. So Ibn Khaldun also classifies sciences, and it's different from the philosopher's classification, which is first proposed by Aristotle based on the theoretical and practical philosophy. Classification of sciences as theoretical and practical philosophy is based on the idea of the unity of methods for all disciplines, which is pure reasoning, Nazar Aqli. Ibn Khaldun classifies sciences into two groups, but the criterion he's using is very different than Aristotle. So he says there are two types of sciences: Aqli sciences and Naqli sciences. Aqli sciences, they rely on Nazar Aqli, and Naqli sciences, they rely on Nazar Shar'i, as we have discussed before. So Aqli sciences or Aqli disciplines, they are natural sciences, and the people are guided, by their own ability to think, like philosophical disciplines, al-ulum al-hikamiyya, al-falsafiyya. So it includes like philosophy, all natural sciences, medical sciences, etc., all rational and empirical sciences, which does not rely on a divine revelation. And the Naqli sciences, which rely on divine revelation at their foundation, that the scholars, learn these from those who have established them. يأخذونه عمن وضعه, like علوم نقلية الوضعية. There is no place for the intellect in those sciences except relating the particular cases to universal principles. So there are like general rules, and then you apply those general rules to practical cases. This is the role of Nazar in these disciplines. So Aqli disciplines and Naqli disciplines. So you see that this is a methodological, epistemological classification. But Aristotle's classification, it was based on theoretical philosophy and practical philosophy. So Ibn Khaldun applies the methods he suggests in the Muqaddimah in his book Kitab al-Ibar, and داخلا من باب الأسباب على العموم إلى الإخبار على الخصوص. So basically, he says that in his Kitab al-Ibar, the large history book, he is applying the general principles to particular historical cases. So this is very similar to his understanding of fiqh. So there are general principles, kulliyat, and then he's implementing them to particular cases. Thus, this work contains an exhaustive history of the world. It forces stubborn, stray wisdom to return to the fold. It gives causes and reasons for happenings in the various dynasties. It turns out to be a vessel for philosophy, a receptacle for historical knowledge. You see this emphasis on causes and reason, and the argument that history is part of the philosophy. So this is like first we discussed Ibn Khaldun's approach to reported knowledge, and then his critique of like how you deal with the reported knowledge. Then I'm sorry. Then we discussed his understanding of rational knowledge. Now let's discuss his spiritual epistemology, his views on Kashf, what he says about this. So he accepts that the spiritual unveiling, the opening of the eye of the heart, is a way of knowing. And he mentions this both in his Muqaddimah and also his there is another book, Shifa'ul Alil, in another book which he wrote on Tasawwuf Ulum. So the knowledge of the human beings, the attainment of the form of the thing to be known in its essence. The soul is an essence in which the forms of the things to be known are obtained. The objects in the soul are constantly vacillating between negation and assertion, and the goal is to connect the two extremes through a middle term to achieve agreement between knowledge and the thing known. Such agreement, conformity of the knowledge and the outside world, mutabaka, may often be clarified by technical logical argumentation, burhan sana'i, but that's form behind the veil, and it is not like the direct vision that's found in connection with the knowledge of the angels. So the veil may be removed. This is what he's saying. And the agreement may thus be effected through direct perceptive vision without any need to like using any logical argumentation or research. It's been explained that human beings are ignorant by nature because vacillation affects their knowledge. They learn through acquisition of knowledge and technique because they obtain the objects they seek by applying their ability to think according to technical rules. The removal of the veil of the heart to which we have referred is achieved only through training in zikr exercises, of which the best is prayer, which forbids sinful and evil actions through abstinence from all distracting food of consumption, of which the most important part is fasting, and through devoting oneself to God with all one's powers. So you see, fasting is very important for unveiling of the heart. Okay, so we realize from here that Ibn Khaldun accepts this spiritual epistemology and spiritual methodology to reach to knowledge. So in conclusion, I'd like to bring this framework, the map. So Ibn Khaldun's methodology is multiplex. So it includes pure reasoning, religious reasoning, and the purification of the self. So you see that there are two major methods, Nazar and Tasfiyah or Tazkiyah. So this method reasoning, it's objective and rational, as we have discussed before. So it has two branches. Pure reasoning is like Nazar Aqli, and then religious reasoning, Nazar Shar'i. And the Nazar Aqli is used by philosophy and empirical disciplines, natural sciences, and Ilm Umran, as argued by Ibn Khaldun. And religious reasoning, Nazar Shar'i, it is used by Ilm Kalam, Fiqh, Usul Fiqh, Furu Fiqh, Hadith, and Tafsir. And on the other hand, you have the method of purification of the self, which is used by the discipline of Tasawwuf. You see that Ibn Khaldun also subscribes to this multiplex methodology in his works. Thank you. So I stop here, and then we can continue with your questions.
Great, thank you very much, Professor Shenturk. So that was, you have kept to your time very nicely. We have plenty of time, depending on the appetite of our participants today, to actually explore this a little bit more. What I'd like to do, ask everyone to sort of start thinking about the presentation, and possibly, sort of, if you have questions, please raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute, and you can ask your question on that. So I'm just to remind you that the questions today are really focused on the lecture itself. So kindly try and stick to our topic for today, which is an interesting one. And I think I'm sure there'll be some questions from students of either history or any other sociological science to see where they contrast between their own methodology of study versus what Ibn Khaldun has actually proposed. So am I seeing any hands up at the moment? Please feel free to ask. If I'm missing anyone, sorry, my view on my laptop may be slightly skewed and I miss somebody, but whoever wishes, please do feel free. So I think we could potentially, one of my questions to you, Professor Shenturk, that I had while we wait for others to formulate, and again, it's more of a sort of me thinking out aloud. Obviously, you know, how they sort of try and debate about whether history is a science, and you know, they're trying to, even the definition of economics as a science. I was listening to the radio today that they're saying, you know, economics shouldn't be a science because nobody seems to agree on the basis of economic philosophy and thinking. So when it comes to history, if I remember when I studied history at school, the history books naturally relate a particular set of events. Every so often you find the historian may make a one or two comments there as part of their understanding of the event, but generally sort of narrating the actual event of what happened. And then the classroom opens up the discussion when it comes to, you know, the what do you think happened here? So, you know, all the essays writing in history that we do in school, in A levels, or you know, in high school, it's all about trying to see if we can actually bring an argument to sort of rationalize the event itself, and to see if we can actually draw on some other facts. So I'm just thinking that, is it ever possible to have all the facts that happen at that time to make it into an exact science, if you know what I'm coming from? So can you really know what actually was happening in the social context, the economic context, the you know, the prevalent thinking at that time? You know, yes, we know a certain group of people. I mean, for instance, trying to understand the Egyptian, the people are fascinated by the Egyptian sort of civilization of the old, and the availability of material of that time to know what's actually happening. So is it ever possible to know the detail, and then sort of, and when would you say it becomes approximation to science as opposed to somebody's view on history? Because, you know, they say the history is written by the conquerors. Ultimately, their view ultimately prevails. So, you know, I was saying to the other day, you know, how history is taught of the world. 600 years of Ottoman history is just literally brushed aside, and it's a blip in the history of mankind when we look at Western study of history. You know, it's just not relevant anymore. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm rambling a little bit just to, you know where I'm coming from, I think.
Yes, yeah. I mean, your question has always, you know, bothered, you know, both the scholars and also the laymen, whether we can, you know, reconstruct what happened in the past in a true and reliable way. And actually, Ibn Khaldun's effort is to help the historians and the social scientists, you know, to avoid making mistakes while, you know, talking about what happened in the past. And you know, he's suggesting that you know, don't rely only on the reports, because some authorities, you know, provided these reports, you know, and this is what he calls taqlid, you know, so
following,
receiving, you know, a piece of information from a respectable authority, it is not enough, you know, he's saying. So apply some critical methods, like first, verify the data, whether, you know, whether this is possible or not, you know, whether this is like compatible with like human experience, whether it's compatible with the reason, whether it's compatible with the nature of society, politics, and economics. You know, examine these things, so basically, you know, his effort is to help us to avoid, you know, making mistakes when we reconstruct what happened in the past. So this is his goal, and actually, the essence of his methodology is that he does not see that empiricism and rationalism are mutually exclusive, or rationalism and, you know, divine revelation, they are mutually exclusive, or like rational methods, empirical methods, and the spiritual experience, these are mutually exclusive. He rejects these as false dichotomies, false dualities. He says we have to use all of them together. We have to use empirical methods. We have to use rational methods. We have to use naql, the reported knowledge, al-khabar as-sadiq, the hadith, the ayat, and also information reported by historians about the past, and also spirituality as a source of knowledge. So basically, he's integrating all of them from a holistic, comprehensive perspective. This is what we need to learn from Ibn Khaldun, because today, because of the reductionism of the modern and postmodern philosophy of science, they tell you you can be either empirical or rationalist, or religious person, or somebody who accepts spirituality. Choose one of them. You cannot use all of them. These are mutually exclusive. But Muslim scholars in general, and Ibn Khaldun as an example, they teach us this maratib al-usul, multiplicity of methods. They say these are not mutually exclusive. They complement each other, but you have to use them in their proper domain. You have to know their limits. Like reason is good, but don't use reason to understand the metaphysical world, to understand the hereafter, the paradise, or God. Reason can help you, to understand like certain things. Also, empirical methods, they are good, but don't overextend empirical methods to try to understand everything.
Sure.
Don't overextend rationality, but don't overextend wahi also. Wahi also has limitations. Same thing with the spiritual knowledge that one gets through intuition, or through kashf or dreams. Use each knowledge in its proper domain. Don't make epistemological trespassing. Don't make methodological transgression. Use all of them in its proper domain. So this is the most important lesson we learn from Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun's method of maratib al-usul, multiplex methodology, which is commonly used by all Muslim scholars.
I think that's a very, very good point you make. Would I be correct in saying that Imam Ghazali at one stage in his life was going down the pure philosophical Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd approach, and then he came more of an uniplex approach to trying to deal with the Greek philosophy, and then came back later on? Would I be correct in saying that? Would you say he was always held a multiplex approach to the knowledge and his opinions?
Yeah. As I mentioned in the beginning, there are many misinterpretations of Ibn Khaldun. There are many misunderstandings of Ibn Khaldun by many Western scholars, but also Muslim scholars who are influenced by the Western approach. And their misinterpretation and misunderstanding emanates from their lack of familiarity with maratib al-usul, multiplex methodology, because their reading and in terms of Ibn Khaldun is based on the assumption that one scholar can use only one method in its academic and scholarly work. So one scholar must be either empiricist or rationalist or religious or mystic, Sufi. See what I mean? So because of this wrong premise, wrong assumption, they try to place Ibn Khaldun in a box. Okay, which box I should put Ibn Khaldun in? There is empiricist box, there is rationalist box, there is religious box, and then there is mystic Sufi box. Which box I should put him in? So all of them are only partially true, but Ibn Khaldun combines all these methods. So Ibn Khaldun used a toolbox not just a single tool. And depending on the subject he's studying, he uses the proper tool. So if he's studying the hereafter, the paradise, the hellfire, he is using wahi, But if he's studying like empirical worlds, like the social world or the natural world, he's using empirical methods. Same with Imam Ghazali, from the very beginning until the end, he was using multiplex methodology. Although like later in his life, he was like more involved in tasawwuf, in kashf, etc. But from the very beginning, he accepted that, kashf, tasawwuf is a legitimate source of knowledge. But it is a domain. It could not be used in everything. Sure. I mean, he never argued that tasawwuf is enough, forget other disciplines, forget the theoretical thinking, forget others. No, the last book he wrote is Al-Mustasfa, which is based on rational thinking. It's Usul Fiqh book. It's a methodology of fiqh, very rational. Yeah. He also wrote a book on logic, which is completely rational. He wrote philosophy books, but he wrote fiqh books. He wrote kalam books, and he warned against overextending reason. All domains. He said reason is good, but only within the physical world. That's don't commit epistemological trespassing. Don't commit methodological transgression. Use every method, every epistemology in its proper domain. But some people misinterpret Ghazali the way they misinterpret Ibn Khaldun. Because if you read Imam Ghazali and in your mind, you assume that a scholar can use only one method, then you are doomed. Because Imam Ghazali is not using only one method. At times he's using rational methods. Like he wrote a logic book, for instance. Like once a friend of mine came to my room, he had like Miyarul Ilm, which is a logic book written by Imam Ghazali, and Mishkatul Anwar, which is a Sufi explanation of the Ayatul Nur. So he said Imam Ghazali either wrote this one, which is a logical book, completely rational, or he wrote this book, which is like based on kashf from Tasawwuf perspective. He couldn't possibly write both of them. Then I said, my friend, how about Maratib al-Usul? How about Maratib al-Ulum, this multiplex epistemology, multiplex methodology? So I think multiplexity is the key to properly understand our classical scholars. Multiplexity is the key to understand the structure of the classical Islamic thought.
Absolutely.
Without looking at classical Islamic thought, Islamic disciplines, and the thinking of our classical scholars from the lens of multiplexity, you are doomed. You can never ever properly understand them. You try to put them in a box. You try to reduce them to a particular dimension. This is only one dimension of them, only one level of them. So we need to apply multiplexity as a key to properly understand the Islamic intellectual history and also the thought of classical scholars.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Wazir Bakhsh, you had a question, but you've lowered your hand. Would you still like to ask your question, please? Sorry, I took.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Is that okay?
No, I will ask the question now.
Yep, please.
I'm just wondering, when I'm looking to Quranic history from the Quran, history, world history, Ibn Khaldun, Ibn Kathir, Surat an-Nabawiyah, and Hadith literature, these natural disasters that happen in history, from the flood in Yemen, and also the other disasters, the flood of the time of Noah, alayhi salam, and earthquake, and stones coming down from the sky with the people of Lut. How do we see natural disasters? How we interpret that in history in these times? Because we're living in a time when history are happening, but we respond or react to situation. But how do we explain these phenomena?
Yes. So, I mean, like as a historian, if a report reached to you and you are a historian, you check whether this report is a true report, reliable report or not. How do you do it? You know, so you check it whether, you know, your experience approves this report. Let's say there is a report about a big earthquake. Okay, so whether this big earthquake is possible or not, you know, I mean, if you experienced an earthquake, you can check, you know, whether what's reported is compatible with your experience or not. So this is one source. The second, whether it's rational or not, and then the third, whether it matches with the nature of society. So this is how you critically analyze that report, and you don't only rely on the authority of the person who reported it. Okay, so let's say Tabari or Ibn Kathir is reporting a big earthquake, you know, somewhere, you know. So rather than relying, okay, Ibn Kathir said this, I accept right away, or Tabari said, I accept right away, because it's not ayat or hadith. This is a report, right? So you say, okay, I'm going to double check whether this is, you know, really, you know, true or not. So let's say, you know, if the report says 1 billion people died in the earthquake, but then we know that, you know, the whole world population was not 1 billion at that time. And 1 billion cannot die in an earthquake, right? So our experience, our rational thinking, the nature of Umran, everything rejects. You know, it's not compatible with anything. So if you get such a report, then you reject it. You know, and you can say, okay, this is reported by a good authority, very respectable, prestigious authority. We have to accept it. No, we are not going to accept it. So Ibn Khaldun gives the example of some reports which says, you know, such and such king had like 600,000 soldiers. He says this is impossible because these 600 people need food. Where did he get the food to feed this kind of army? And you know, and then he says such a big army cannot make a war because such a big army to make a war, they need a big field, you know, and this army cannot be controlled. You know, like he's using this like a rational and empirical you know, perspectives to critically analyze those reports. So we have.
But yes, the other question I want to ask along that line.
Yes.
According to the Quran, some of these natural disasters are punishment from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala.
Yes.
Yes. So and Ibn Kathir mentioned about the dam. When the big rats went and the boreholes and the big flood happened, and then people start to migrate and go different parts. So I am asking, and my background is history academically. So I'm just asking, do we, from this metaphysical point of view of taking the Quranic things, do we use all those in analyzing even history as is happening with us now? As an ummah, as humanity, do we bring them into our discussion or understanding of what is happening and how we can what we can do to, to not to allow it to happen again, or because what I find a lot of time we will describe the actual the geological terms of earthquake, right? And we can talk about global warming and what have you. But we can describe what an earthquake is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes,
we can describe what this is, but how in our existence as a human being, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a supreme Lord, how we interpret all of these things happening with us.
Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. So this, Allah says, I am going to test you with many calamities, with many trials, which will cause you lose lives, lose property, and on another hadith, Rasulullah says, the biggest calamities are given by Allah Ta'ala to the messengers of Allah to test them, and then the saints, according to their levels. There is no way to stop those calamities, disasters, flood or earthquake, to take place. But we can change our response to them, and if we have good adab, and good iman, and we surrender to Allah Ta'ala, those calamities wouldn't be a punishment for us. They would be a means for Allah Ta'ala to elevate our spirituality and to contribute to the increase our maturity, spiritual maturity, and to make us humble and worship to Allah Ta'ala with complete nothingness, selflessness, and humility. So this would benefit us. But if these kind of things happen to people who don't believe in God, they are involved in committing sins, etc., this is a punishment to them, because they only suffer and they get nothing out of it. Both Muslims and non-Muslims, they suffer, but Muslims get good thing out of it by showing sabr. Eventually they gain something out of it for their hereafter. But non-Muslims, they also suffer and they get nothing for their hereafter. So Rasulullah said, it's very strange that Muslims, if they are in good times, they make shukr and they gain paradise. If they are in bad times, they show sabr, they gain paradise. So in both cases, Muslims gain something out of it. So we have a question here by Numan Siddiqui in the chat.
I was going to read that. Yeah.
Yes, okay, go ahead.
I was going to just say to you, according to Ibn Khaldun, is it possible that tasawwuf guide or informed informal or religious reasoning of usul or sharia, even at individual level? So can it guide or inform religious reasoning of usul or sharia on an individual level, and which may later become foundation for some taqlid by a follower of an individual? So I think he's asking, is tasawwuf enough to give us guidance on a religious usuli level and sharia level?
Yes, this is a very important question. How do you know the borders of these methods? We talked about multiplex methodology, right? We said this is a toolbox. There are various methods in the toolbox, and you have to use it in their proper domain without transgressing, to the domain of the other methods. So tasawwuf is a method, and then we have usul fiqh, based on the nazar shari. This is another method. So how you properly use them in such a way that there is no transgression, there's no trespassing. Okay, it's a very important question. So if you use tasawwuf not to replace usul fiqh,
Mm.
then it's acceptable. But if you use tasawwuf and overextend its domain to replace usul fiqh, then it's a big mistake. So for instance, once we had a meeting, one of our friends said that his sheikh saw in his dream that something is halal or haram or something like this. And one of our friends said the dream is not a delil in fiqh. I mean, even if you're a saint, your dream is not delil in fiqh, because Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, they have never ever used dream as a delil to prove or disprove a rule in usul fiqh. Usul fiqh is very rational. So we take usul fiqh as given, and then if there is an area left open by usul fiqh, then in this area it's okay. You can rely on tasawwuf, on your intuitions, on your dreams, on your inspirations, but it should never ever contradict with the explicit principles of fiqh.
Yeah, I mean, this overextension, Professor Shanturk, is probably the source of half of our malaise when it comes to Islamic deviation or esoteric deviations, if you want to call them, when it comes to within practice of Islamic, within society and culture and thinking, because people go either one or the other, and they go just down that rabbit hole, and they feel that's the way to solve all our problems and nothing else matters. And I think that balancing act, which is where I think in a way why I'm really sort of enthused by this whole multiplex methodology, is that it allows the layering. Each layer is equally important as the other when it comes to approaching whatever knowledge we have. And I think that's the word, really. I mean, it is the need of our time to actually readdress our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and within Islamic thinking and the framework of thinking. So now that's thank you for that. That's really helpful. Hopefully that answers the question. We have another one here by let me just see, who is it by? I think it was
Mir Sadiq Ansari. Sadiq Ansari.
Yeah, Mr. Ansari. Yeah.
He's asking whether we can apply the methods,
to the Sirah. Yeah.
proposed by Ibn Khaldun to the Sirah. Of course, I mean, there is some fabricated material about the Sirah of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, and applying these methods will help us to sift them away. And Ibn Khaldun himself did it, like when he wrote the life of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, and also our ulama always, try to protect the knowledge about Sirah from getting polluted by fabricated information, exaggeration, and mythology or legendary. I mean, an example, we have some stories about Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. Like in those legendary stories, it says with his sword he killed 100 people at once. This is not acceptable. See what I mean? Neither experience nor rationality nor a nature would approve such a claim. There are examples like that. So I mean, and our ulama used these methods. We don't need to exaggerate when we want to praise Rasulullah alayhi wasalam or his companions. We don't need to turn them into deities or gods or angels. Just rely on the authentic, genuine reports about them. It's enough, because previous religious communities, the community of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, You know, first they killed him, then they turned him into God. Subhanallah. Look at this.
Yeah.
Both extremes. Like one extreme, like going and killing the messenger of Allah Ta'ala. I mean, of course, this is what they thought. Allah Ta'ala did not let them kill him. You know, but on the one hand, like they want to kill him. On the other hand, they want to turn him into God. Two opposite extremes. You know, we don't need to do these things. You know, just accept. Bashar wa Rasulan. He's a human being, but all given the mandate of serving as the messenger of Allah Ta'ala. And Rasulullah warned us against this.
Sure. I think there was a comment there. Sorry, there's another question here by Aisha. How can the phenomena, Aisha Saeed, how can the phenomena which are referred to as miracles be explained? Are they to be rejected altogether because they cannot follow these maratib al-usul?
No, miracles are very rational and they are compatible with the rational perspective because if someone is a messenger of Allah and Allah wants to show to people that he is his messenger, Allah Ta'ala can make miracles through that person just to support the claim he's presenting to his audience. So this is rationally explicable, but an ordinary person cannot make any miracle because there is no rational explanation for it. Why would Allah Ta'ala make possible for an ordinary person to break the laws of nature? But Allah Ta'ala can break laws of nature just to demonstrate to people that this is my messenger. He is receiving messages from me. He's an exceptional person. So this is like miracles are rationally possible through messengers of Allah Ta'ala, but not through the ordinary people.
Another question, and I'm coming close to our end of our session today, about another 5 minutes, but Sadiq Ansari has asked, should we apply jar and ta'dil at the same level in hadith to seerah as well, in your opinion?
Yes. Yeah. And our ulama did it. They have done it.
Brilliant. Okay, that's a good, straightforward answer there. I think, are there any other questions? If not, I think that was a good discussion. Again, I mean, for me, the whole multiplex approach to knowledge, history, is something that I think we really need to, in my opinion, push out there, especially for those who are serious about studying, whether it's history or current reality or any form of knowledge. And I think it's something that I really think that we've got the wrong end of the stick and adopted historically the Western methodology of reductionist approach to knowledge gain, which is always leaves us poorer and more confused than ever before. And I think I've never been able to, when I was studying sort of modern scholars versus sort of usuli scholars, I was never able to work out why the modern scholars came up with completely very sort of disjointed way of looking at society, almost an apologetic sort of approach to the Islam's contribution to society and their approach to try and answer modern day issues based on a particular approach. And now when I look at it through the multiplex lenses, I can see where they've actually taken a uniplex approach to solving that problem. So they either completely ignore the spiritual basis of a text or the principles of the textual basis of an argument, and they use reasoning or rational thinking all the way through their argument, and it's very evident in there when it comes to it, and they justify. And I think, as we know, this is very well promoted in modern sort of academic circles, and these scholars become the department heads in the Western world, as opposed to the usuli thinking individuals. So it's very interesting how they gain the prominence as well in terms of trying to influence people around us. Yeah, so Well, thank you. If there's no other questions, I would like to thank Professor Shantuk for your presentation again today. Really, we appreciate you taking time out in your busy schedule, and may Allah bless you for that. I'd like to thank everybody else who joined today, despite all your various engagements. And just to let you know, as mentioned earlier, this will be our last lecture pre-Ramadan. We will be resuming our series on Ibn Khaldun's multiplex, sort of, I think, on multiplex human ontology and action. And the next lecture will be Tuesday, 2nd of May, inshallah, after Ramadan. So please keep an eye on the WhatsApp group that you hopefully are all part of. And you'll see the information there as we go along. Today's session will also be available as a link later on as a recording for you to actually go back on and revise. And we basically, I wish everybody, as Professor Shantuk said earlier on, I also like to mirror that everyone have a peaceful and a productive Ramadan in ways that only you know what you need from this Ramadan. Inshallah, we look forward to joining all of us again, refreshed in multiple dimensions, hopefully by the end of Ramadan, and have this, and I think what would recommend that the 4 lectures that we've had already, probably worth going over them again and trying to see the thread of thinking through that. So when we have the latter 3 lectures, we'll get more out of it. Jazakallah khair for everybody's participation, and to you, Dr. Shantuk. Take care, inshallah.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ramadan Kareem.
Ramadan Kareem.